Hey YouTube, Untamed here. So as you can see by the title, Americans have stopped paying their bills. Currently, we are seeing record high foreclosures, record high credit card delinquencies, record high auto loan delinquencies across the nation. Record high repossession rates, as you'd imagine, as a part of that. So in today's video, I'm going to highlight those details as of why Americans have no kidding stopped paying their bills and peel back the layers of the onion as to what the future holds for us. Personally, I believe we are on the brink of a recession. All the facts point toward that. So stick with me in this video as we talk through it all. And for those of you who frequent my channel, you know I generally just talk about vehicles, the vehicle market, market trends surrounding vehicles at large. However, for those of you who don't know, I do hold a doctorate in industrial and organizational psychology. That combined with my MBA and having held a real estate license for quite some time really does propel my interest and passion in all of this right here. So that's why I'm talking through it today. So we can't talk about any of this stuff without talking about inflation at large, right? When it comes to vehicles, MSRP costs on all vehicles across the board, across the nation, have spiked 40%, just over 40% since 2019. That is a huge amount. That combined is just with regular day-to-day cost of living. Anytime you go to the grocery store, you're going to be spending a lot more than what you did just a few years ago. Heck, if you were to go to McDonald's, Burger King, Culver's, any kind of fast food restaurant, you are now spending 3 times more than what you were 5 years ago. That's pretty insane if you think about it. And with the cost of vehicles going through the roof, so many people are actually doing what we did recently. We went out and just bought a 2006 Lexus GX470 here for about $11,000, right? Obviously not cheap by any means, but much cheaper than what we're finding brand new. So many vehicle manufacturers are offering top trim levels. We're talking the Platinum, Limited, King Ranch, you name it, that cost $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. And that, unfortunately, has become our new normal. And that's pretty pathetic when you think about it. And don't get me started about insurance premiums. The annual average insurance premium within the US back in 2018, just in 2018, used to be just under $1,200 a year. Okay, and that was the average. Fast forward to today, we're over $2,500 a year. So we have over doubled since 2018. Pretty wild. And do you remember just back in the mid 2010s when you can go out and buy a brand new Toyota Tacoma and go spend $20,000 to $30,000? You can go do that, kind of get a lesser trim and easily pay that kind of money. Nowadays, your average Toyota Tacoma, for example, is over $50,000 here in 2024. Pretty insane. And when you go to any kind of Toyota dealership, what do you see? You see a whole sea of inventory, brand new Toyota Tundras, Tacomas, just sitting there collecting dust. Historically speaking, the Tacoma in particular has always been the best mid-size pickup seller, right? So the best seller in that segment has always been the case. But now when you go to a dealership, they're everywhere. They're flooding dealership lots. And that right there is a huge indicator of just how the consumer is no longer interested. Consumer spending is dropping drastically. And that really is a double-edged sword if you think about it. Because if consumer spending continues to go down, the Fed will likely drop the interest rate, right? I mean, and that's a good thing when you say it out loud. However, ultimately, what does that do? We just saw during the pandemic, during COVID, the Fed dropped interest rates down to 2 to 3%. And because of that, we saw a huge spike in inflation. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak. So whenever they drop that interest rate, which they likely will, if consumer spending continues at its current trend, it's going to be detrimental to us ultimately. So really, it is safe to assume that Americans are exhausting their savings right now, because we are seeing that with their credit card use. The credit card use is skyrocketing at a very alarming rate, if I'm being honest with you. So here within the US, we are seeing record high levels month over month when it comes to credit card use. And it's concerning, especially when you look at the average interest rates on a credit card. The average interest rates, this should come as no surprise to you, is between 22.5% and 24.5%. That is absolutely insane, because if we're running that up every single month, so many people are losing their rears when it comes to spending that interest rate on that credit card. And because of that, that's why we're seeing so many people having to foreclose on their house. They can't keep up with their regular bills. And well, when they can't keep up with their credit card payment, absolutely their mortgage payment and their auto loan payments are going to fail as well. To me, the most bothersome part of it all is salaries have not kept up with the cost of things. And it's a pretty stark difference between the two. So salaries have only gone up just a little bit, whereas the cost of living, cost of rent, cost of mortgage, cost of groceries, cost of insurance, everything has gone up at an alarming rate by comparison. To paint a picture for you, Zillow recently published a report saying the average amount needed within a household to live comfortably within the US right now is $106,500. That's the average household income needed to live comfortably, according to Zillow. Back in 2020, the average household income needed to live comfortably was just under $60,000. Fast forward to today, the average household income truly is just over $81,000. That is only up from $66,000 back in 2020. So to paint a picture for you, we have seen an 80% increase in the amount needed per household to live comfortably within the US since 2020. However, we have only seen a 23% increase in the actual incomes within the US. So the part that kind of bothers me is the fact that the GDP benefits when people like you and I suffer. If you think about it, so 80% of the GDP comes from consumer spending, from people like you and I going out and spending money within the economy. It's frustrating because as the Fed continues to hike the rates up, we, the people, and interest rates continue to go up. We, the people, we struggle a little bit more, right? It's a little bit harder for us to get by. But that is when the GDP starts to benefit a little bit. And that's when the nation at large is able to get out of their enormous deficit. But it's almost backfiring a little bit. These hikes of interest rates are halting consumer spending. People are not just going out and spending money like the nation really wants us to. So it's kind of a catch-22 to some degree. They're hiking rates in order to try to make up for the enormous deficit that we have, but people can't. We can't keep up. So something has got to give, and that generally leads to a recession. And the irony of it all is the GDP relies on consumer spending to get out of our enormous debt. However, most consumer spending right now, as credit card delinquencies would entail, is coming from credit cards, is coming from loans, right? Auto loans. It's coming from things where people don't truly have the money. So we're trying to take care of a debt with more debt. And I mean, I guess that's America in a nutshell if you think about it. But it's quite alarming when you think about it being driven by credit card debt at large. I mean, in summary, really, a lot of people have just gotten too comfortable spending money they don't have. And that has become the norm for so many people. And that is a very unfortunate truth in America here. Things have gotten too far out of reach and out of hand when it comes to the cost of things, where people have no choice but to resort to using their credit cards to just pay for the bare necessities. That's unfortunate. And a lot of it really does stem from just recently. A lot of people kind of got used to their lifestyle, pre-pandemic, even during the pandemic. The cost of money came down so much, right? I mean, you can go out and get a loan for a very, very low interest rate during the pandemic with that 2% interest rate. And now, well, looking at anywhere from 6 to 7.5% being your typical interest rate on a home, or up to 10% if you were to go out and get an auto loan. That has currently become the new normal throughout the last year and a half. That's problematic. People cannot keep up with those kind of interest rates, but we've gotten used to the lifestyles that we've kind of generated and adapted to within the last few years. That is a recipe for disaster. And the sad part of it, to me anyway, as a parent, a dad of 4 kiddos, it costs a lot of money to have a growing family, right? Let's face it. And that's kind of always been the case, but right now, more than ever, it costs a ton. And a lot of younger adults are choosing not to have kids for that reason. USDA just announced, the top leading factors with having children are, of course, housing, food, and childcare. Oftentimes, both adults or both individuals within the family need to actually work in order to keep up with bills, not to mention keep up with providing for their family. So providing for your kiddos in 2024 here, it costs an average of $16,500 to $18,500 per year per child. Well, if you're like me and you have 4 kiddos, well, you better start looking for another job, I suppose. Another alarming bit is the GDP projected on the low end to have seen a 2.7% growth in the first quarter of 2024. In reality, we saw a 1.6% growth. That is absolutely concerning because, 2.7 was on the low end guesstimate. And we came in well underneath that. And when you tie that with the Fed projections for Fed interest rates, dropping their rates, they wanted to go under 5% by the end of 2024. Now, recently, they've kind of hike that up to being right around 6.2, 6.4% for the Fed interest rate set by end of 2024. So all that to say is we continuously make these projections for a lower Fed interest rate, but it ends up being higher every single quarter ultimately. So we're far off from the mark and our projections are pretty left field. So just this past month, we have seen the slowest hourly wage bump since June of 2021. And I tell you what, the cost of things are not slowing, right? But yet the amount that we are getting paid have just slowed to the slowest point within the last 3 years. That's concerning. having had a real estate license for a bit now, I really find it appalling at how expensive housing has gotten to, and the fact that it has not really come down, right? We would have expected it to have come down a bit more than what it truly has, but instead, people are living in fantasy land and continuously believing that their house out in California is worth $3 million, even though, well, let's face it, anywhere else in the world it would be worth $250,000. So, kind of appalling that we have not seen a drop in housing costs. And to be fair, here within little old Wyoming, I see it too. I was stationed here a few years back in 2018, and I went and spent $440,000 for my house back then. Same, very similar house to what I have here. Very similar ranch style home on 5 acres. I have 5 acres here too, but here I'm gonna be selling this house for $900,000 here in just a couple months. So over double the cost for the same house. This is not a $900,000 house, I guarantee it. But here we are, that is our reality. And well, to be fair too, I spent about that when we moved here a couple years ago. So, to be fair, I'm not cashing out on it by any means, but that's what I'm trying to get at. The cost of living, the cost of housing has gotten far out of hand, and it's stayed out of hand, and that, again, is another recipe for disaster. We're about due to see a huge drop. And speaking of houses, foreclosures have gone up 11% since this time last year. Again, that's kind of an unprecedented number, and it has been a compounding number over the last 3 years now. So that right there is a huge indicator. Again, people just cannot keep up with things, and that's the unfortunate truth. A lot of people are pretty quick to brag about their 2.5% home interest rate that they landed during the pandemic. However, those same people, you'll often find them kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth because they kind of want to move, but they feel stuck. They're kind of stuck because they likely overpaid during the pandemic for their house, $100,000, $200,000 more than what they should have, because it was a feeding frenzy, if you all recall. But during that time, people were quick to buy, but now we see a very low inventory because so many people bought during the pandemic, and they're not selling. They're not getting rid of that 2.5% interest rate because they're not going to really cash out on it right now, with the current interest rates being about 7%, 7.5% nationwide on average. So very low inventory, but that is keeping prices of houses high. So again, another catch-22, people are stuck in their very low interest rates, they're not selling, very low inventory, that keeps the demand over the supply out there. So being a car and truck guy myself, I always find it very interesting to see the huge levels of inventory coming throughout the US. We see it with Toyota in particular. I often follow Toyota closely. They have a ton of brand new Toyota Tundras, a ton of brand new Toyota Tacomas just sitting on their lots. Again, just a year and a half ago, you couldn't even fathom that idea. But the amount of inventory and the rate at which that inventory is growing is the most alarming bit. And because of that, for the first time in Toyota's history anyway, we're seeing them discount their brand new trucks, several $1,000s. Toyota Tacomas are quickly being dropped $4,000 off MSRP. That's not a lot, but when you're talking Toyota Tacoma, that doesn't normally happen, especially right after they introduce a full new redesign here in 2024. That normally doesn't happen. The Toyota Tundra, they're having to slash those prices $10,000 to $12,000 and offer 1.9% interest rates in order to move that inventory. And only then are they actually able to sell it, because they've seen that huge spike of inventory. They have a ton of carryover from previous months. They're just really struggling. And that's not just Toyota. So many vehicle manufacturers have an influx of inventory because people just cannot afford to buy brand new vehicles right now. The frustrating part for me is with the Toyota Tacoma in particular. I always kind of mention this, but now it is made entirely out of Mexico. We see a lot of vehicle manufacturers moving production to very low labor cost countries. We're talking China, we're talking India, Mexico for a lot of folks. And we have already seen a huge drop in quality control coming out of that Mexico plant down there, a couple of Mexico plants, and yet the prices still skyrocketed. They went up, we're talking 20-25% just over last year. From 2023 model year to 24, that big of a price increase, but yet we're seeing them save over 80% of how much they're actually spending in labor cost for that truck production. So that's the stuff that's a rub for me, and it bothers me that we're seeing a drop in quality, but we're seeing an uptick in price still. What gives? So ultimately, we continuously see GDP rates come in lower than expected and inflation coming in higher than expected. So really, that is a recipe for disaster. And truly, when you look at those details and look at all these factors, that is a recipe for recession. So I personally believe we are on the brink of a recession, probably within the next 10 to 12 months, I would wager, given our current trajectory. I'd be curious to know what you guys think. What would that recession look like for America in today's day and age? What is that truly going to look like? What is it going to look like for the housing market? What is it going to look like for the automobile market? And really just holistically speaking, what is that cost of living going to shift to moving forward as we live through a potential next recession? So as always, guys, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to watch these videos. If you found any kind of value in this, or if you enjoy this, please let me know. I do enjoy talking about it. These are topics that I am passionate about. It really does coincide with my education. I really enjoy it. So thanks for sticking around. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'm happy to do more content like this if there's an interest. Until next time.